My name is Specialist David Martinez, United States Army. For the past 3 weeks, I've been stuck on night patrol at Diego Garcia, a tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Out here, the nights feel endless. Just me, the fence line, and the sound of waves crashing on the beach. Boots on sand, flashlight sweep, radio check. Over and over until the hours blur together. The monotony gets to you. Some nights I find myself staring at the stars, so many of them out here, more than I've ever seen in my life. It almost feels peaceful, but peace doesn't last long on this island. Not for me. I was on the east side of the perimeter when my radio crackled. Staff Sergeant James checking in as usual. His tone half joking but with an edge underneath. He told me the security cameras had picked up movement earlier. Could have been locals sneaking in to fish, or just wild hogs from the jungle. Either way, he told me to stay alert, so I did. I scanned the beach, the fence, the tree line, and that's when I saw it. A figure moving along the shoreline outside the fence. Human-shaped, at least from the distance. But the way it moved, God, it wasn't normal. Too fast, too smooth, like it was gliding across the sand instead of running. I've seen Olympic sprinters on TV. This wasn't that. This was something else. I reported it in, told James what I was seeing. He asked me to describe the speed. I hesitated. How do you explain something that shouldn't even be possible? I just told him the truth. It was moving faster than any person could. Against orders, I left the perimeter through the maintenance gate and ran onto the beach. My boots sank into the sand, my lungs burned, but no matter how hard I pushed, the figure kept gaining distance. It didn't stumble, didn't slow down. I shouted at it to stop, my voice drowned out by the surf. It never looked back. Then, without warning, it turned sharply toward the ocean. 3 quick strides and it was in the water. I expected splashing, thrashing, something. But there was nothing. No swimmer's trail, no head above the waves. Just empty water, rolling back and forth as if mocking me. By the time James caught up, I was standing there on the shoreline, chest heaving, flashlight beam cutting across the surf. I told him what I'd seen. He didn't laugh. He didn't even question it. He just stared out at the black water with a look I didn't like he already knew something was wrong here. We went back inside the fence, but the island didn't feel the same. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. And as I finished the patrol, I glanced back at the water one last time. The ocean flexed. Just once, like something massive shifted beneath the surface. Too wide for a wave, too smooth for anything natural. Then it stilled, silent and calm, as if daring me to believe it had all been in my head. But I knew what I saw, and I knew one thing for certain. Something on this island isn't right. The figure had vanished, but the water wasn't empty. Morning on Diego Garcia is supposed to be routine. Chow hall coffee, powdered eggs, the same faces shuffling through the mess line. But that morning the air tasted different. The kind of heavy silence where everyone knows something but no one wants to say it out loud. Word had already spread that my patrol wasn't normal. I grabbed a tray and sat across from Carlos, another specialist I trusted more than most. He took one look at me and smirked. "You look like hell." I told him I hadn't slept much. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard you saw something last night." I hesitated. On base, rumors travel faster than any radio transmission. Denying it would only make it worse. So I admitted, yeah, I'd seen something on the beach. Fast, human-shaped, and wrong. Carlos didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just nodded as if he'd been waiting for me to confirm it. "You're not the only one," he said. That got my attention. Carlos told me the Chagosians, The local islanders allowed to work around the base had been acting strange lately, more secretive, meeting in groups at night, avoiding American personnel. And then he dropped something heavier. One of his contacts mentioned gatherings on the North Shore, near caves not marked on any official map. He said the locals considered them sacred places to leave offerings. But lately, they'd been going more often. Before I could press him for details, James joined us at the table. He didn't waste time with small talk. Carlos repeated what he'd just told me. James listened carefully, his usual cool expression tight with something I hadn't seen before, worry. We all knew the history. The Chagosians had been forced off this island decades ago when the base was built. A handful remained to work, but the resentment lingered. They lived in the shadows of our presence, tolerated but never welcomed, and now they were gathering in secret. Could be nothing, James said, though his tone didn't match the words. Could be everything. I thought about the figure I'd chased into the ocean, the way it had moved, too fast, too inhuman, and now locals whispering in caves, circles forming on beaches after dark. The pieces didn't connect yet, but they were pointing towards something. James finally broke the silence. If there's a security concern, we need to check it out, quietly, off the record. Carlos nodded. I can find the cave. I surprised myself by speaking up before James could. Then let's go tonight, after shift. We need to see what's happening out there. James studied me for a long moment. His eyes hardened, then he gave a single nod. North perimeter fence, 2100 hours. Bring flashlights and basic gear. Nothing that raises questions. The rest of the day dragged on like a bad dream. I went through the motions of inspections, paperwork, all the hollow routine of base life. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop replaying that figure vanishing into the sea. Couldn't stop hearing Carlos's voice. You're not the only one. By the time the sun dipped behind the palms, the island felt different. The waves seemed louder, the shadows deeper, the air heavier, as if the place itself was holding its breath. Night came quickly, the sky swallowing the horizon in a matter of minutes. I grabbed my pack, flashlight, water, knife, nothing that would stand out. When I stepped out of my quarters, the compound looked normal. Soldiers laughing on their way to the rec hall, card games in the barracks, the usual end-of-shift chatter. But underneath it I felt something else. A current, a pull toward the North Shore. James and Carlos were already waiting by the fence line when I arrived. Both dressed in dark clothes, both with the same tight expression I knew was mirrored on my own face. No jokes this time. No sarcasm, just a silent agreement that whatever we were about to find, it wouldn't be good. Carlos led the way, slipping us through a maintenance access point and into the jungle path. The night was alive with the hum of insects, but it felt muted, unnatural. The three of us moved in silence, boots sinking into soft sand as the ocean roared somewhere beyond the tree line. After half an hour, Carlos slowed, raising a hand. Here, he whispered. He pushed aside thick vegetation, revealing a dark opening in the rock face, barely 4 feet high, hidden behind coral and vines. A breath of humid air wafted out, heavy with a metallic tang that made my stomach tighten. James clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. The cave's narrow throat stretched inward, walls slick with moisture. "This is it," Carlos said. We ducked inside one by one, the outside world vanishing behind us. And as my boots hit the sandy floor, I noticed something immediately. Footprints, dozens of them, fresh, leading deeper into the cave. Something was waiting for us in there, and whatever it wasn't going to be human. The air inside the cave was heavy, thicker than the humid night outside. Every breath tasted metallic, sharp, like blood on a bitten lip. Our flashlights cut narrow cones through the darkness, beams bouncing off wet limestone walls, catching on slick patches of moss. Each step echoed faintly, a sound that didn't seem to belong to us alone. I kept my eyes on the ground. The footprints were everywhere, bare feet, sandals, some smaller, some wide and heavy. Dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't old either, the edges were crisp, the sand still damp from recent movement. Whoever came here hadn't just passed through, they'd gathered. James crouched low, pressing his glove into one of the impressions. Recent, he muttered. Hours, maybe less. His voice was low but steady, the kind of calm that only made me more uneasy. We moved deeper. The tunnel sloped gradually downward, widening enough for us to stand tall. The deeper we went, the more that strange smell thickened, metal, damp stone, and something else I couldn't place. Something sour, organic. Carlos whispered, "Look at the walls." I turned my light and froze. Carved into the limestone were markings, angular shapes, spirals, and jagged lines running in sequences, one after another. They weren't English. They weren't Creole. They weren't anything I'd ever seen. Some looked freshly scratched, the dust still scattered on the cave floor beneath them. James's jaw tightened. Not graffiti, not random. I reached out, running my gloved fingers an inch above the grooves. The symbols seemed to tell a story, moving across the wall in a deliberate pattern. But a story written in a language no human should understand. We pressed on. The tunnel opened suddenly into a chamber so large our flashlights couldn't find the ceiling. Shadows swallowed the walls, except where our beams caught on something that made my stomach knot. At the center of the chamber stood a crude altar, pieced together from driftwood and coral, lashed tight with fraying rope. Dark stains streaked its surface, soaking into the sand beneath it. The smell hit me all at once, thick, coppery. Blood. Carlos's voice cracked when he spoke. "Please tell me that's not." James cut him off. "It is." He didn't say more, he didn't have to. My light swept past the altar and landed on something arranged along the far wall. At first I thought it was debris, seaweed, maybe animal carcasses dragged in from the beach. Then my brain caught up with my eyes. They weren't random. Fish, crabs, and a seabird all arranged in deliberate circles. Offerings, sacrifices. I felt the weight of the chamber pressing down on me, the air thick with a silence that didn't belong to us. A silence that was watching. James moved slowly around the altar, his light skimming across more of the carvings etched into the stone. They grew denser here, whole sections of wall layered with spirals and symbols that seemed to shimmer under the beam. "This isn't just ritual," he murmured. "This is organized." Carlos shook his head. Organized for what? Before James could answer, a sound carried through the passage behind us. Voices, low, distant, but growing closer. More than one. Carlos's eyes widened. "They're coming back." James snapped his flashlight off, plunging us into suffocating darkness. "Move," he whispered. "Now." We pressed ourselves against the cold stone, breath shallow, hearts hammering. The sound of footsteps and murmured words echoed through the tunnel, bouncing closer with every second. In that moment, crouched in the pitch black with the stink of blood and symbols etched around me, I realized we weren't trespassers. We were intruders in something far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than we'd ever been warned about. And the ones who belonged here were almost at the door. We held our breath as the voices moved past the tunnel mouth, muffled and echoing deeper into the cave. Their words weren't clear, half Creole, half something harsher, older. When the sound finally faded, James signaled us forward with 2 fingers. We slipped from our hiding place, deeper into the main passage. The air was warmer here, almost damp with heat, and the smell, the metallic rot, grew stronger with every step. My flashlight beam shook slightly in my hand, and when it landed on the next chamber, I wished I'd never come inside. The tunnel opened into a cavern larger than the last, its walls crawling with carved symbols, but it wasn't the carvings that froze me in place. It was what lay at the center. Another altar, taller, broader, its surface slick with layers of dried and fresh blood, and around it, arranged in a triangular formation, were bodies. Not animals this time, human. 3 of them, at least that I could see. Their skin was marked with cuts, deliberate patterns etched into flesh. Limbs had been severed and positioned separately, as if the bodies themselves were pieces of some puzzle only the carvers understood. Carlos gagged, hand over his mouth. "Oh, Jesus!" I forced myself to look closer. One of the faces was familiar. Ravi, maintenance crew. He'd been reported missing 2 weeks ago. Another was Madhu from laundry services. She disappeared 3 weeks earlier. It wasn't rumor anymore. It wasn't superstition. These were ritual killings, and the victims were people we worked with every day. James's jaw clenched tight, but his voice stayed level. "This isn't random. This is sacrifice." I swept my light along the back wall and nearly dropped it. More remains, half hidden in the shadows. Fish, birds, and human limbs, arms, legs, arranged in spirals that mirrored the symbols carved into the stone. The chamber wasn't just a crime scene. It was a place of worship. Carlos fumbled for his phone, snapping quick photos, the flash bursting across the grotesque scene. James began scribbling in his notebook, copying some of the symbols. I stood guard, though every instinct screamed at me to run. That's when my beam caught something in the far corner, a pile of fabric. At first I thought it was discarded clothing, but the closer I looked, the more I recognized. Torn fatigues, boots, the shredded remains of an American uniform, soaked dark with blood. My stomach turned cold. Whoever it had belonged to wasn't here anymore, only their clothes. Before I could say anything, the sound returned. Voices, closer this time. James's head snapped up. His eyes found mine in the dark. No words were needed. We had seconds before the ones who made this chamber their temple came back, and we were standing in the middle of their altar. We didn't run. Not yet. James motioned for us to douse the lights, and the chamber fell into suffocating black. The voices grew louder, echoing from the tunnel. More than one, maybe 4 or 5. We pressed against the wall, silent, hearts hammering. Torchlight flared through the passage, shadows stretching along the stone. I could hear them speaking, a mix of English and Creole, but threaded with something else. A language older, harsher, not meant for us to understand. They didn't see us, not yet. They passed deeper into the cave, carrying baskets, chanting low. James waited until the glow faded, then jerked his head toward the exit. We didn't argue. The sprint out of that cave was a blur. Sand crunching, lungs burning, the metallic stench of blood following us all the way back into the night air. When we broke through the tree line and saw the moon over the surf, I thought I might collapse from relief. But relief didn't last. We knew we couldn't keep this quiet. Not with the bodies, not with the symbols, not with the uniform in that corner. The next morning we went straight to Colonel Anderson. His office was pristine, every paper stacked, every pen aligned. He didn't look up when we entered, not until James spoke. "Sir, we need to report an incident, evidence of multiple homicides on the island." That got his attention, his gaze sharpened like a knife. "Explain." James outlined everything: our unauthorized entry into the cave, the symbols, the blood, the mutilated bodies. Carlos slid his phone across the desk. "Photos, sir, documented." Anderson scrolled through them one by one. His face didn't change, not a flicker, as if he were looking at supply requisition forms, not human remains carved up for sacrifice. "You identified some of these people?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "Ravi, Madhu, both reported missing last month." "And the uniform," James added, "American issue, covered in blood." Anderson set the phone down carefully like it was fragile glass. Then his eyes locked on us, cold, calculating. "You entered a restricted area without authorization." The words hit like a slap. "With respect, sir," I said, my voice tight, "we found evidence of murder. These people were killed." "That is not your concern," Anderson snapped. His voice didn't rise, but the edge in it cut deep. "This falls under British jurisdiction. Our agreement is clear. You are not to interfere." Carlos leaned forward. "Sir, this is ongoing. We heard voices in the cave. There could be more victims." Anderson's eyes narrowed. "You will delete those photos, destroy your notes, speak of this to no one, am I understood?" Silence. None of us wanted to believe what we'd heard. James finally broke it. "Sir, with respect, this is bigger than jurisdiction." Anderson stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm. "If you pursue this, if you mention that cave again, I will have you court-martialed. Your careers, your freedom on." His eyes flicked from James to Carlos to me. "This matter is closed." We had no choice but to salute and leave. Outside the command building, we didn't speak for a long moment. The sun was hot, the base bustling like any other day, but everything felt hollow. "He's covering it up," I said finally. James didn't argue, he just stared at the horizon, jaw clenched tight. "Then we keep quiet for now, but we don't forget." Carlos glanced around, lowering his voice. "I sent backups of the photos to my brother before the meeting. They can't erase all of it." I felt a flicker of relief, but only a flicker, because Anderson's face, cold, unbothered by the horrors in that cave, told me something I couldn't shake. He already knew. The day after Anderson shut us down, the island didn't feel the same. On the surface, everything ran like normal morning drills, chow, maintenance checks, but beneath it there was tension. A charge in the air you couldn't ignore. It started with the locals. The Chagosians usually kept to themselves, fishing, working support jobs, avoiding us when they could. But that afternoon, I noticed them lingering near the perimeter fence in small groups. They weren't laughing or working, or even pretending to blend in. They were watching. 4 of them stood near a maintenance gate, voices low, glancing at the base every few seconds. A trio of older men gathered on a small rise, eyes fixed on the motor pool. And down by the beach, at least a dozen were clustered in a loose circle, heads bent, whispering. The moment one of our patrols came near, they scattered. Not like they were surprised, more like it was planned. I told James what I'd seen. He just nodded grimly. "They're preparing for something." By evening, the sky had changed. The horizon darkened in the southwest, clouds rolling in heavy and fast. No storm had been forecast. The morning reports had shown clear skies, but within hours the blue was gone, swallowed by a black mass churning over the ocean. I stood at the eastern fence line, staring at it. The clouds weren't moving like they should. They churned in circles, spreading across the sky like ink in water. The air grew heavy, the kind of pressure that makes your skin prickle before lightning strikes. That night, I was assigned to the communications tower, monitoring duty. On any other night, it would have been boring, tracking radio chatter, logging weather data. But as I climbed to the top, I saw them. The the Chagosians. At least 30 of them gathered on the southwest beach. The storm was already pounding the shoreline, waves slamming into the sand, rain falling in sheets. But they didn't move. They didn't run for cover. They stood in a circle facing the ocean, perfectly still as if the wind and water weren't touching them at all. Some had their arms raised, others bowed their heads, and if the wind carried right, I thought I heard them chanting. I grabbed the binoculars. Their lips were moving in unison, the circle unbroken even as the surf reached their knees. They weren't fighting the storm. They were waiting for it. "James," I said into the radio, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "I've got 30+ civilians on the southwest beach. They're standing in formation, facing the water, not seeking shelter, just standing there." His response came back with hesitation. "Probably some kind of ritual. Don't get involved, just log it." I wanted to argue but stopped, because in that moment the clouds split. A jagged flash lit the sky, and for just a second I saw the waves beyond the circle bulge outward, unnaturally, like something enormous was moving beneath the surface. The storm wasn't just weather, and the islanders weren't afraid of it. They were calling to it. The storm didn't pass. It built. Hour by hour the wind howled harder, the rain hit sharper, and the ocean turned violent against the shore. The calm tower groaned in the gusts, metal beams creaking like old bones. I logged the data automatically, wind speeds climbing past hurricane strength, barometric pressure dropping faster than I'd ever seen. None of it made sense. No tropical storm in this region formed this quickly. Then the static began. At first, I thought it was just weather interference. The radios crackled, screens flickered. But then through the noise a voice cut in, faint, desperate, speaking English with an accent I didn't recognize. "This is urgent, please respond." I froze. This wasn't one of our authorized frequencies. I grabbed the mic anyway. "This is Diego Garcia. Identify yourself." The reply came, broken by static. "I am one of the original islanders. You must listen. Everyone on the base must evacuate now." My hand tightened on the mic. "State your name and location. This is a restricted channel." Names didn't matter. The voice cracked, urgent. "What matters is what's coming. When my people were forced from the island, the balance was broken. The old ones beneath the sea, they are waking." The words hit me like a cold wave. "What old ones?" I demanded. "What do you mean?" The transmission sputtered, words dropping in and out. "Rituals keep them sleeping, sacrifices not enough, Colonel knows." Then silence. I tried hailing back, cycling frequencies, but the line was dead. James arrived minutes later, drenched from running through the storm. I played him the recording our system had captured, every fragment of that broken warning. His face darkened with each word. "Could be a hoax," he said finally. But his tone was flat. He didn't believe it. Not really. I turned to the windows, rain streaming down in sheets. Through the blur, I thought I saw the ocean swell again, an unnatural bulge rising from beneath, then sinking back into the storm. The radio crackled again, this time with Anderson's clipped, icy voice. "Communications, report status of anomaly." I hesitated. James answered for me. "Unidentified transmission received, sir. Warning of something rising from the sea." Static, then Anderson's voice, sharp as glass. "Disregard unauthorized chatter. Focus on your duties." The channel cut. I stared at James. He didn't meet my eyes because we both knew. Anderson wasn't surprised. And outside, in the black churn of storm and sea, something vast was moving closer. The storm broke strangely. One moment, the tower was shaking under winds strong enough to rattle the bolts from their sockets. The rain was a solid curtain, hammering the glass so hard I thought it would shatter. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, it all eased. The rain softened to a drizzle. The winds dropped to nothing more than a restless breeze. The equipment showed impossible readings. Barometric pressure stabilizing within minutes. Wind speed collapsing from 120 knots to under 20. Tropical systems don't just stop, I muttered, scanning the monitors. James didn't answer. He was staring out the window. Martinez, he said finally, his voice low. Look. I raised the binoculars. Through the haze 2 miles offshore, the ocean wasn't flat anymore. It bulged, swelled, as if something massive beneath the surface was pressing upward. The water heaved unnaturally, rolling in a dome shape before crashing down again. It wasn't a wave. Waves move with rhythm, predictable and clean. This was deliberate, and it was moving closer. I radioed command. Unidentified displacement in the southeast quadrant. Size exceeds known marine activity. Possible seismic event. Anderson's voice came back, cool and clipped. Continue monitoring, report any changes. That was all. No panic, no orders to prepare. Just continue monitoring. But the truth was undeniable. The sea was rising. By midnight, the displacement was only a mile offshore. The tower shook, not from wind this time, but from pressure, deep vibrations rolling through the island itself as if the seabed were groaning. Then I saw it. The surface broke. Something vast and wet and wrong emerged from the black ocean. Not all at once, but in pieces. A glistening limb thicker than a battleship's hull, barnacle-crusted and studded with things that looked disturbingly like mouths. Then another limb, curling upward and slapping into the sea with a force that sent 30-foot waves crashing toward the shore. The central mass followed, rising higher, water streaming off in torrents. At least 200 feet across, studded with unblinking eyes that blinked too slowly, too deliberately. They weren't animal eyes. They were watchful, aware. James whispered the words I didn't want to think. It's intelligent. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared through the binoculars as the shape dragged itself upward, appendages spreading in all directions like some colossal, star-shaped nightmare. And with each second the distance closed. It wasn't staying in the water. It was coming for the island. The alarm came just after 0100 hours. The base-wide sirens wailed, red lights strobing across the compound. Soldiers poured from the barracks half-dressed, weapons slung, eyes wide with confusion. Over the comms, James's voice boomed across every channel. This is not a drill. Unknown hostile entity approaching from the southeast. All personnel to defensive positions. Weapons free. I kept my binoculars trained on the shoreline. The creature was closing fast, each massive appendage pulling it forward like a living siege engine. Every motion displaced enough water to swallow entire docks. Colonel Anderson's voice cut across the chaos, calm, commanding, colder than ever. All batteries fire at will. The first missile streaked from the eastern launch pad, its exhaust flame tearing across the night sky. Then another, and another. A storm of fire lit up the coastline as heavy guns, mortars, and machine guns opened up in unison. The impacts were deafening. Explosions blossomed against the creature's bulk, orange flashes tearing the night apart. For a brief second, hope surged through me. Then the smoke cleared. The thing didn't even flinch. Its eyes, dozens of them, blinked in eerie unison, black pupils locking on the base. The barnacle-like growths on its skin shuddered, opening and closing like grotesque mouths. Every bullet, every missile, every shell vanished into that impossible mass with no visible effect. Negative damage, James reported grimly. All fire ineffective. The creature pressed forward. Its first limb reached the shore. With a sickening, almost gentle motion, it pressed down onto the sand. The 15-foot seawall, built to withstand hurricanes, crumpled like cardboard. The dock beyond it folded and snapped, metal screaming before vanishing beneath the weight. Soldiers scattered, some firing desperately, others frozen in place. The limb dragged inland, crushing vehicles, warehouses, men, everything beneath it flattened like ants under a boot. Another appendage touched down further north, pulverizing an aircraft hangar. Helicopters and transport planes crumpled as if made of foil. Our evacuation routes gone in seconds. The ground shook beneath my boots. The entire island seemed to groan under the weight of the nightmare pulling itself ashore. I grabbed the radio, shouting over the chaos. "Colonel, the entity is making landfall. Defensive positions are collapsing." A deep, resonant sound cut me off. Not a roar, not a scream, something older. A vibration that rattled the tower, shuddered through my chest, and scrambled half the equipment into static. The thing was speaking. And as the sound rolled over the base, I realized with horror it wasn't just destroying, it was hunting. Its limbs moved with precision, sweeping toward clusters of fleeing soldiers, every strike deliberate, every movement calculated. James turned to me, face pale but steady. "Martinez, we can't hold this island." I already knew, because as I raised my binoculars one last time, I saw the central mass rising fully from the water. And it wasn't just coming ashore. It was settling in. Like Diego Garcia had always belonged to it. The island was breaking apart. From the tower, I watched the eastern perimeter vanish under a sweeping limb. Concrete, steel, men, everything folded into the sand like toys crushed under a hand. The ground trembled with each impact, fissures cracking open along the coral foundation. Anderson's orders cut across the chaos. "All remaining batteries, maximum fire. Do not let it breach the base interior." Missiles launched in furious arcs, mortars whistled overhead, machine guns rattled until barrels glowed red. The night sky bloomed with fire and thunder. It didn't matter. Each explosion lit up the monstrosity's mass for a heartbeat, showing barnacle-crusted flesh, writhing appendages, and eyes blinking in unnatural rhythm. But when the fire cleared, the thing simply kept advancing, untouched, unstoppable. The barracks collapsed under one limb. The mess hall disappeared under another. The motor pool was flattened like tin under a boot. Screams carried faintly through the storm before being swallowed by the roar of destruction. Carlos's voice crackled over the comms, frantic, breaking. "South side's gone, vehicles destroyed, we're falling back to the bunker." Static cut him off. James slammed his fist against the console. "Damn it, we've lost him." His face turned to me, pale under the red emergency lights. "We're next." The tower shuddered violently. One of the creature's limbs had reached the base of the structure, dragging itself across the foundation. The whole building groaned, steel beams bending under stresses they weren't built to withstand. I grabbed the radio, shouting into the static. "Command, the comm tower is compromised. We need evac." Nothing, just dead air. The power failed. The lights flickered out, plunging us into darkness for a single, suffocating breath. Then the backups hummed to life, flooding the room with a dim, blood-red glow. Through the window, I saw it. The creature's central body loomed less than half a mile away, rising higher than the tallest hangar. Water poured off its bulk in sheets. Its eyes, dozens, maybe hundreds, blinked in uneven patterns, but too many of them were aimed at the tower. It knew we were here. James pulled me down just as the first impact struck. A massive limb slammed against the side of the tower, the shockwave ripping through concrete and steel. The entire floor tilted, monitors toppling, glass shattering into knives of rain. The sound was everywhere, screeching metal, collapsing walls, and beneath it all that deep, resonant vibration, a sound so low it rattled in my bones. It wasn't just a noise. It was a message. I didn't know how I understood it, but I did. The tower wasn't being destroyed at random. We were being targeted. The second impact nearly threw me off my feet. The calm tower swayed hard, the floor tilting so sharply that every console slid across the room in a shriek of tearing cables. Papers, gear, shattered glass, all of it rained down as the structure groaned like a dying animal. "Move!" James shouted, dragging me toward the stairwell. But before we reached it, another limb slammed into the base. The whole tower bucked like a ship in a storm. I hit the wall. Air blasted from my lungs. The red emergency lights flickered and died, plunging us into blackness broken only by flashes of moonlight through the shattered windows. For a heartbeat, all I could hear was the monstrous vibration, the sound of something alive, intelligent, and impossibly vast pressing its will against us. Then came the final strike. The world dropped out from under me. Steel screamed, concrete snapped, and suddenly we were falling. The tower collapsed in on itself like a folding knife, each floor pancaking down, shoving air and debris into a howling storm inside the structure. I remember fragments, the crunch of metal, a monitor spinning past my head, James shouting my name before his voice was swallowed by the roar. Then impact. Pain flared white-hot across my body as something heavy pinned my legs. Dust filled my mouth and nose, choking me. For a long moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I thought I was dead. But then faintly I heard it. Groaning, not steel this time, a human, James. My voice was ragged, barely a whisper, a cough, weak but real, somewhere nearby under the rubble. Relief surged through me, sharp and fleeting. At least one of us was still alive. I shifted, forcing my arm free, pushing debris aside inch by inch until a crack of moonlight spilled into my little pocket of space. It was enough to see him, half buried, unconscious but breathing. Blood darkened the side of his face. The ground vibrated again. Dust rained from above. I froze. Through the broken gap in the rubble, I saw movement outside. Not human, not even close. A massive limb slid across the remains of the tower, crushing steel like paper. Dozens of unblinking eyes moved past, scanning the wreckage. And in that terrible moment, pinned in the ruins, I realized the truth. It wasn't finished with us. It was searching. The silence didn't last. Through the narrow crack in the rubble, I saw the limb pause. A ripple passed along its length, barnacle-crusted flesh twitching as the dozens of eyes embedded in it shifted, blinking, adjusting, searching. It knew we were down here. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe too loudly. Dust burned my throat, but I held it in, chest aching. Beside me, James groaned softly, still unconscious. I pressed my hand over his mouth without thinking, muffling the sound. My own pulse pounded so loud in my ears I swore the thing could hear it. The limb scraped against the wreckage, metal shrieking as steel beams folded inward. Debris shifted above me, sending pebbles and concrete dust cascading onto my back. Each vibration threatened to collapse the tiny space that was keeping us alive. The pressure grew unbearable. Then, suddenly, The limb moved on. It dragged itself further across the rubble, crushing what was left of the upper floors. I waited, counting in my head. 30 seconds, a minute, 2. The vibrations grew fainter, but they didn't vanish. The creature was still nearby. I finally dared to move. My hand fumbled through the debris until it closed on something smooth and rectangular. My phone. The screen was cracked, but it lit up when I pressed the button. No signal, of course. The creature's presence killed every system, but the camera worked. If we were going to die down here, someone had to know, someone had to see. I angled the phone at my face, whispering into the darkness. "This is Specialist David Martinez. Diego Garcia has fallen. The base is gone. The entity, the thing from the ocean, it's on land now, and it's hunting." The ground shook again, harder this time. A low, resonant sound filled the air, vibrating the rubble around me. The support beam above my head creaked dangerously. James stirred, mumbling something I couldn't make out. "Stay with me," I whispered, gripping his shoulder. "Don't move, just don't move." Through the crack, I caught one more glimpse of the monster. Its central body loomed beyond the ruins, rising like a grotesque mountain against the moonlit sky. Hundreds of eyes scanned in every direction, cold and calculating. It wasn't just tearing the island apart. It was hunting survivors. And from the way its limbs shifted, curling back toward the collapsed tower, I knew it wasn't done with us yet. The first crack of steel made my blood run cold. Somewhere above us, a massive limb pressed into the ruins, prying at the wreckage like a hand rummaging through a toy box. Concrete groaned, beams snapped, and the space around me shrank with every shift. Dust poured down, coating my tongue with grit. It wasn't random destruction anymore. It was searching. James stirred again, eyes fluttering open. His voice was weak, hoarse. "Martinez." "Quiet," I hissed, pressing a hand against his shoulder. "Don't make a sound." But silence wouldn't save us for long. The thing outside already knew. Another screech of metal. A slab above us shifted, spilling chunks of debris that thudded inches from my head. I swallowed hard, panic rising like bile. If we stayed here, we'd be crushed. If we moved, we risked drawing its attention. Pinned between death and death. James coughed, blood staining his lips. He tried to sit up, but pain contorted his face. His leg was bent wrong, broken badly. He wouldn't be walking out of here. "Go," he rasped, reading the look on my face. "Find a way out. Don't let this thing take both of us." I shook my head. "Not leaving you." The ground shook violently, cutting off the argument. Through the crack in the rubble, a colossal eye blinked open, so close I could see the membrane glistening. It lingered on the tower ruins, the pupil dilating as if sniffing for heat or sound. It knew. I killed the phone's light and pressed myself flat against the dirt, heart hammering like it might tear free. James's breathing was ragged beside me. The limb shifted again, curling into the ruins with terrifying precision. Not smashing now. Reaching. Probing. I had seconds. Maybe less. Either stay here and be unearthed like prey, or risk everything in the narrow crawl space to my left. A jagged opening that looked barely big enough for a human body. The creature's shadow passed over the crack of moonlight, plunging our little refuge into total black. I didn't have time to think. The rubble shifted again, this time closer, too close. A limb, barnacle-crusted and slick with seawater, scraped into the ruins above, pushing aside steel beams like twigs. The sound wasn't destruction anymore. It was deliberate, careful, searching. I turned to the crawl space. A jagged slit in the debris, narrow, half-blocked by twisted rebar, barely big enough for me to squeeze through. With James's leg shattered, it might as well have been a brick wall. He saw me looking and shook his head. "You can fit, I can't." "We're not having this conversation," I whispered harshly. I slid closer, ignoring the glass and grit cutting my palms. "I'll pull you through, one way or another." Another quake shook the rubble. Dust rained down in choking clouds. Through the crack overhead, a cluster of eyes peered in, dozens, unblinking, black pupils dilating as they fixed on the movement. James grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite the blood loss. "Listen to me. If you stay here, we both die. If you go, maybe one of us lives. You have to make a call." "I'm not leaving you." The rubble above us groaned and split. A sliver of moonlight widened, and through it I saw the limb curl inward, its grotesque mouths opening and closing, tasting the air. No more time. I hooked my arm under James's shoulders. "Then we both go." He grimaced as I dragged him toward the crawlspace, pain etched across his face, but he didn't fight me. The opening was barely wide enough. Metal scraped his gear as I shoved him forward inch by inch. He bit down on his sleeve to stifle a scream. The ground shook again. The eye shifted closer. Then a sound cut through the rubble, an awful, sucking inhale, as if the thing was sniffing us out. I shoved James harder, ignoring the blood on my hands. My own chest barely fit as I wedged myself in behind him, concrete scraping my back raw. Behind us, the limb pushed deeper into the ruins. Metal shrieked. Rocks collapsed. The crawlspace was our only chance, but every inch forward felt like eternity. I could feel the vibrations of its weight pressing down, the rubble shifting just feet behind. Any second it would close the gap completely. "Don't stop," I hissed, though James was barely conscious. "Don't you dare stop." Then the crawlspace narrowed to the width of my shoulders. I sucked in air, wriggled, scraped through. My gear snagged, tearing free as I forced myself onward. Behind me, the rubble cracked open. The creature had reached the chamber we'd just left. And I knew, if I looked back now, I'd see its eye filling the space. The crawlspace seemed endless. Every inch forward scraped skin from my elbows and shoulders. Dust filled my lungs, and each breath came with the taste of blood and grit. Behind us, the rubble groaned as the creature's limb dug deeper, prying, probing. The sound of shifting concrete followed like the grinding of enormous teeth. "Almost there," I rasped, though I wasn't sure if James could even hear me. His breathing was shallow, his head lolling as I dragged him inch by inch through the jagged tunnel. Then air. A sliver of moonlight appeared ahead, faint but real. I pushed harder, forcing my body through the final gap. The concrete tore my back raw as I shoved James forward with the last of my strength. He slid out first, collapsing onto wet sand and shattered coral. I followed, clawing my way into the open night. The first breath of fresh air was so sharp it hurt. For a second, I thought we'd made it. Then I looked around. The base was gone. What had once been rows of barracks, hangars, and warehouses was now a field of rubble drowned in seawater. Fires sputtered weakly where fuel tanks had ruptured, their lights swallowed by the bulk of the thing that towered over the island. It was on land now. Fully. The central body loomed above the ruins like a living mountain, its 5 massive limbs stretched across Diego Garcia in a grotesque star, each appendage dragged methodically, flattening what little remained standing. The eyes, hundreds of them, blinked in uneven patterns, scanning, searching, hunting. I crouched low, pulling James behind a broken slab of concrete. My hands shook uncontrollably as I checked him. He was pale, bleeding, but still alive. A sound rolled across the island, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled my bones. It wasn't just noise, it was deliberate, a call. And in the distance I saw movement. On the beach, through sheets of rain and scattered firelight, figures stood in formation. Dozens of Chagoshans. They hadn't fled, they hadn't hidden, they were waiting. Arms raised, faces lifted toward the monstrosity like worshippers greeting a god. The storm had been their ritual, the sacrifices their offering. And now their god had answered. The creature's eyes shifted in their direction, and for the first time that night I saw it hesitate. Not in confusion, in recognition, like it knew them, like it had been called. The island wasn't Diego Garcia anymore. It belonged to it. The creature straddled the base like a grotesque starfish, its limbs flattening everything that had once made this place human. Barracks, runways, fuel tanks, it was all rubble now. And still it moved with purpose, not rage. Purpose. From our cover among the ruins I held James upright. He drifted in and out, lips cracked, eyes glassy. Every time his chest rose, it felt like a borrowed miracle. That's when I saw them again. The Chagoshans. Even as soldiers screamed and weapons rattled uselessly, the islanders stood in a great circle on the beach. Dozens of them, arms raised, voices rising in chant. I couldn't hear the words through the storm and destruction, but the rhythm carried. Low, steady, ancient, and the thing listened. Its many eyes turned toward them. The vibrations changed, resonant tones shifting until they matched the cadence of the chant. For a heartbeat, everything else, guns, fire, the screams seemed to fade. Just the worshippers and the god they had woken. It hit me then. The sacrifices, the caves, the rituals, they hadn't been random. The island had always been a seal, a prison. When the Chagoshans were forced off, that seal broke. The military thought they'd claimed the land, but they had only unchained what was beneath it. And now it was free. The radio at my side crackled weakly. Anderson's voice, strained but still composed. All remaining personnel regroup at Central Command, last defensive line. I looked around. There was no command. The bunker was crushed beneath one of the limbs. Anderson was either buried with it or lying to the end. James coughed blood. His eyes found mine, faint but steady. "Record it," he whispered. My phone was still in my pocket, miraculously intact. Hands shaking, I lifted it, hit record, and aimed it at the devastation. "This is Specialist David Martinez," I said, voice breaking. U.S. military base Diego Garcia has fallen. The entity, it cannot be killed by conventional weapons. It is intelligent, it is deliberate, and it will not stop here. The ground trembled again. The creature shifted, its limbs pressing deeper into the island. Cracks spiderwebbed through the coral foundation. Diego Garcia itself was sinking under its weight. I turned the camera back to my face. "If anyone finds this, know that we tried. Know that it's real, and know that it's coming." The roar returned then, a deep, resonant note that split the night. Only this time it wasn't just sound. It was an answer to the chanting on the beach. I looked back once more. The Chagoshans still stood, their circle unbroken, even as waves and debris surged around them. And for the first time, the creature slowed. It bowed. The last thing I remember before the rubble gave way beneath us was the sea rushing in, black and endless, and the cold certainty that humanity had never been alone on this planet. We had only been tenants, and the landlords had come home.